Hi folks, my name's Sean McCusker. I'm an artist, curator, and all-around art lover, and I'd like to show you a little bit of my art and my art world. I'm most well known for my oil paintings, like this one here. I create surreal landscapes filled with mystery and color, and I do that by color and contrast, as you see here, but also my technique. So I'm going to show you a little bit about my techniques and how all of it comes together to create these mysterious paintings. This painting is an example of one of my oil pieces. They're built up with a thin layer of glazing. This is an old technique, but I have a unique modern spin on it. Glazing, for those that don't know, is where you apply a thin layer of transparent oil, let it dry, and apply another layer, usually 3 or 4 layers, to get tinting and a certain gradation of color. As you can see, this is very strongly built up of those gradations. Instead of only painting 4 such layers on an oil, I will do it start to finish. So each of these paintings is built up with roughly 30 layers of this process. The process takes a while because each layer has to dry. The drying time takes about a day to create this kind of beautiful glazing effect. All right, so this is an example of one of my pieces in progress. This only has maybe 10 or so layers on it. So you can see a lot of difference from this and the final piece. Here, a lot of the white of the initial gesso layer is coming through. The colors aren't quite as strong, but you have this strong feeling of the light kind of coming from the surface of the painting. This is what I consider the ugly phase of the painting. This lasts about 20 layers of the process before the colors start to cohere and we start to see what we're going to see in the final piece. This process, again, takes a long time, a day for each layer to dry. So each of my final paintings are built up around 3 months of work. All right, this painting is an example of a completed work. This particular piece I did during demonstrations. So if you're interested about my glazing technique, I do demonstrations now and then. You can check out my website for that, sean-mccusker.com. And this particular piece last year, 2023, as artist in residence at Beckett Art Center, I painted only during demonstrations. So it took me all year, from the beginning of April until I think by November we had this one done. So longer than my normal paintings, but if you came to every demonstration, you would have seen it through every step, every layer of the process, which was quite fun, and I hope to do again. But it's an example of how through this long process, you can get the transitions just right. You get the effect of light emerging from the surface of the painting because the light is literally penetrating the surface these 30 layers deep and then coming back out at us through those layers again. So in person, you get this sense of the light emerging from the surface, and that's an effect you can't get any other way. All right, so these are examples of some of my other mediums that I use. The one here is a silver pen on black paper. This is the way I normally would sketch, and I started to create full compositions out of them because a lot of people like the frenetic movement of my line work, and I like that they only take me a few hours to do. So I started to create these for sale as well. I also like to dabble every now and then into pastel work, and both of these things give me a nice sort of respite from the time it takes to do a full-fledged oil. With the pastels, I get a lot of the nice color that I can achieve with the oil paints. Of course, you don't get that glazing light coming from the surface, but you can create a composition a lot quicker and therefore do a lot more experimentation on the composition itself as you're going. And so these are also, very fun pieces for me to kind of develop and test new and different ideas without the time consumption that an oil takes. All right, so I want to talk specifically about composition in this one. Now, all of the pieces that I create, I don't have a narrative in mind when I create them. And the idea is I want you as the audience to share in the creative process with me of creating that narrative. So I sort of see myself as setting the scene, and then you get to complete it by bringing whatever the story is to it. Now, therefore, what am I creating? I'm creating composition. So I see myself as arranging elements so that they fit, so that they balance in the composition, give you this feeling of awe and interest, and then let the narrative kind of get designed from there. So with this particular piece, I was inspired by several things. One, I wanted a lot of figures. I wanted to have a moon slash sun, but I wanted it to be really large in the composition. Thirdly, I set myself a challenge. And this challenge came about because I had a good friend of mine come to my studio for an open studio one day, and we were talking about composition. And I said, in the same way I'm telling you now about how I construct the composition, well, you never put something dead in the center because then it will unbalance the composition. And she said, well, why? Why will it do that? And I said, well, because that's what you do. And she persisted. And ultimately, I had to say, well, I don't know because I've never done it before. So very shortly after, maybe a week later, I had a blank canvas and I said, well, let's try to put something dead in the center. And so I literally drew my lines and I put the center of the head of this figure right in the center, and then I drew a bullseye around it. And I said, okay, deal with that. And I feel like I achieved that goal and balanced all the focus in the center of this composition right here in the middle with these other figures surrounding it, and in contrast to these, the emptiness above. And so it was a beautiful example of things that I had learned in school. Don't put something dead in the center because it's hard to deal with. Now with my full professional artist experience, now I know that I can deal with something like that. And it was something that really freed me as an artist with these compositions. So when I talk about narrative in my paintings, I mean, what is going on in the scene? And a lot of people have different ideas of what a single one of my pieces is. And I love that. It's so great. In fact, it's probably the biggest joy that I have is when somebody comes up to me and tells me something, the narrative of a painting I've done, and it's something I've never thought of before. This composition is an example of that. So when I painted it, I was thinking, again, very structurally, compositionally. I wanted multiple figures, and I wanted something in the foreground and something in the background. So I have these two figures up here close to us, and this one figure far away. And I thought nothing else of it. However, when I had it first at exhibit, I had a lot of people coming up to me, and they all had the same idea, and some of them were crying because for them, they were seeing two parents seeing their child off to college, and it was a very dramatic, very personal kind of experience for them. I was in my 20s, and that wasn't something I was thinking about at all, even from the reverse anymore. But to them, because I left the composition so open to interpretation, they were able to see it as this very personal thing. And that is something that has always kind of kept on in my mind of whenever I'm painting something or drawing something, and I think to myself, oh, this reminds me of this thing, of letting it be a little bit looser so that people have the chance of coming up with something so much more personal and exciting for them than I would have come up with. So this is a very dear piece in my collection. This is another example of my pastel work. This one, it was a series that I did called the Journey series, and it was all monochromatic. So I was trying to reduce color for them, and the idea was to describe a journey, something that was happening, so traveling. So with that, to give the sense of movement that the figure is on this journey, I created these trails. So it's like carving out a little a rut in the ground as it moved on. As part of this series, I kind of started to wonder what happens sort of at the end, right? Where's the journey leading them? And in doing that, I had this idea of this piece, which is kind of at journey's end, this little light that all the figures are kind of gathered around. And surprisingly, I came up with this idea, and the drawing kind of almost drew itself. It was very quick for me to sort of render it out like this. However, I liked it so much, and every now and then I do like my pastels so much, I will make an oil painting out of them. This was one of the hardest oil paintings I've ever done. All right, so sometimes you have an idea for a painting and it doesn't quite work out. So I was trying to reproduce that image of a bunch of figures around a glowing point in oil, and I could never get it. So this is an example of one of my failures. I just pulled it out of the failure pile, and I had tried to make this composition over a span of 8 years around 4 or 5 times. This particular panel was painted over. This was the third iteration of me just sanding it down and repainting it. And I did a couple other pieces as well that just never came out. And as you can see, it was a big struggle for me. There was something about trying to render the figures both from the back and the front at the same time. I couldn't quite get it to fit, and everything got very, very dark around the whole composition. So I had an idea, and I just couldn't, for the life of me, get it to work out. Now, this is another example where having people come to my studio comes in, because I gave up on this composition in oil. And it was probably at least 5 years after I did this last version of it and tossed it in my trash pile that I had some folks over, and I told them the story of, sometimes you just can't get something. You're just not there. You don't have it in you to render it as much as you'd like to. And they said, well, it's been 5 years. Why don't you try it again? And I didn't have a good answer. So a few weeks later, I decided to try it again. And I got this painting, which came together faster than any painting had ever come together for me before. It felt like the composition was just there, and all I had to do was reveal it. As you can see, the perspective has been adjusted, so now we're seeing up from above a lot more. The lightness of the background is kind of dimmed as we go up top, and I added a moon here to give a little bit more interest to another part of the composition. Now, I will say, I didn't just render this composition, I also rendered it in a square, which is another thing that's difficult to do, dealing with the square in composition. But at this point, I clearly had a lot more expertise, a lot more knowledge of these figures, and like I said, it came together the quickest any painting had ever come together for me. And that was a big lesson of, look at, your past failures and see where you are now, because you might be very surprised. So this is another example of my silver pen on black paper compositions. And the nice thing about that as a medium is it gives you a lot more contrast than using, say, a white marker on black. the silver shines in the light. And so similar to my oil paintings, it gives you this kind of sense of, extra sensory stuff going on, which is really nice. And then, as I said before, the kinetic kind of energy of my line work gives you a lot of movement in the composition. I tend to like to focus on areas of blankness, just straight dark paper in my drawings and some of my oils as well, because it just gives you that offset of this is where action's going on and this is where kind of rest happens. And often the figures are kind of looking towards this restful place, this something over the horizon. This particular piece is one where I have this kind of cliff or bluff going on, and I'm not quite sure how it what it's supposed to mean. It probably is something psychologically in my head that I'm thinking about when I make them, but it's up to you to kind of decide what's going on. But it is something that has come into my work several times throughout my career and is quite an interesting piece. The last thing I'll say about this one doesn't touch on it quite as much as some other examples, but unfortunately, or fortunately, those have sold, so I don't have them to show you. But a lot of my pieces, people will think they look very alien or otherworldly, or even worlds in themselves. And so they have, because of the looseness of the narrative, they can be, earthly, they could be physical planetary bodies themselves. And so it has this local versus kind of extraterrestrial scale to them. Now, I mentioned this to somebody at an opening once, and they looked at a painting similar to this and said, it's not a cosmic thing, they're on a fingertip. So if you look at it in that regard, you see this is a finger, and the figure is this very tiny little element on the tip of a finger. And that was something that just blew my mind when I first heard of it, and really tickled me quite a bit. And I always use that as an example of seeing different things and seeing things that I never would have thought of. And it gives you this sense of the macro and micro scale all in the same composition, and it's very wonderful to have that in your work. All right, so this is an example of a monochromatic oil painting. When I paint, I only have a small color palette that I use, only 5 colors in total. But here I was reducing that. So normally I have 2 blues, a light and a dark, 2 yellows, a light and a dark, and 1 red. And so in this case, I removed the blues except for the very darkest areas of the painting. They do have blue in them. And I was just using the reds and the yellows to create this kind of effect of a sunset or sunrise, but this very dramatic, kind of awe-inspiring vision. And that's where a lot of my paintings tend to end up, is this notion of something very dramatic happening that's just out of sight, or this feeling of something just happening to the figure. And it's that sense of, this tension of something either just having happened or something that's just about to happen that I really like to play with in my work. And this is, very indicative of that, reducing the colors down and just having those shapes and those contrasts really give you this sense of, awe and, inspiration, hopefully. This is a rather unique piece in my collection, what I've done. It actually spans many years, going back to my college days. So in college, I was really inspired and in love with printmaking. So I took all the printmaking classes I could get, and this one was done in wood block printing, and it was just a black and white wood block print, and I liked it quite a bit. And you can see all of the lines that you see are the carvings from the wood block. Now, I made it. It was a class assignment. As you can see, I still had my figures back then. That's when I was developing them. And it was nice. I liked it. Years and years later, after college, I was looking for some art papers to make some pastels out of. I didn't want to go to the art store that day. And so I found this print. And I thought to myself, ooh, that's kind of a really nice print. I think it would look even better if I had it in color. So I decided to draw on top of the print with pastel and sort of colorize it with my, current techniques and abilities. And it really kind of emphasized more of the stretching out of the composition. It's also a rare one because there's clouds in here that are defined. That's not something that I did later on. So it was interesting to kind of go back and work with materials and elements that I was experimenting with early on, and then see where they, how they would work out today. Even still, I think I probably only have maybe, I'd say 4 at the most compositions with a cloud in them. So it is quite a unique thing. But yeah, still a very beautiful work. And you can see the generation of that that little rut that the figure's making in this, which I felt rendered so beautifully in this piece, particularly after it was colored. This piece came together relatively lately. It's a later work of mine, but it harkens back to something that I started, again, speaking of the last piece, way back in my college years. Back then, all of my paintings had huts in them, and you can see in the background here is a little hut emitting light out the front and the top of it. And looking back at my work, I found that I started off with huts and then they go away. There's no huts anymore. And I said to myself, why is that the case? They're a nice element. They add light. So what's going on? Why did they disappear? And I think this is an example of the subconscious coming out. So when I was at college, I was away from home. And I think, a lot of people get homesick. And I was feeling that. I was feeling like, home and wanting to drive home and seeing that light at the end of a long journey to get back. And so I was using these huts. After college, I moved back. I had my own home, no longer homesick. The huts go away. So once I realized that, I said to myself, well, let's try to put them back in. And this was one of the first compositions that I did that. So I took the dramatic nature of the hut and put it way back in the background with these figures kind of looking on. And compositionally, it kind of just came full circle for me, looking back now at my past. And where I used to call home, and knowing that now I'm here with friends and creating artwork, and that's kind of another step of the journey. And I always felt like that was really quite powerful for me. And this particular piece I made as part of a large exhibit I had here actually at the Liechtenstein Center for the Arts, where my studio is. And so it was this beautiful moment of coming together of, my career at that point as an artist. So thank you so much for seeing some of my works. Again, my name is Sean McCusker, and if you're interested in seeing more of my work or contacting me about it, about my demos as well, you can go to my website. It's sean-mccusker.com. That's SEAN-MCCUSKER.com. I'm also currently artist in residence at the Beckett Art Center, where I will be probably doing some more demos throughout next year, hopefully. But we'll have a large show there in 2024 of my work. A lot of the tall pieces that I've shown today will be a part of that exhibit as well. So definitely check that out and anything else in the future. Thank you so much for listening to me, and take care and love some art.